The title of our panel is Never Give Up, Making a Difference with Open Government Laws. And we have a tremendous lineup of individuals here who have given so much of their time and so much of their energy toward helping ensure that open government is something that in the future will benefit so many, but they have really difficult stories to tell. So appreciate y'all being here, appreciate y'all understanding how difficult it is for everyone on this panel here today to tell their story. I'm going to start with my immediate left is Robert Dyer. Mr. Dyer was born in Paris, Texas. His father was a National Park Service ranger, and Robert grew up living in numerous national parks throughout the country. It sounds pretty wonderful. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Parks and Recs from Texas A&M and his teaching certificate from East Texas State University. He taught middle school and high school science in Paris, Texas for 22 years and retired from teaching in 2014. I personally have a theory that middle school teachers and NICU nurses both have an automatic entry to heaven. So, Robert, you're there. You're there. Next to him is his lovely wife, Kathy Dyer. And Kathy was born in North Carolina and moved to Houston as a child. She graduated from high school in Houston and earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Texas A&M University. Kathy worked for the Texas Department of Transportation for 26 years and retired in 2011. And she is an absolute amazing speaker who has testified before various House and Senate committees numerous times. We're thrilled to have Kathy here with us today. To Kathy's left is Craig Garnett. Craig has been the owner and publisher of the Uvalde Leader News since 1989. He lives in Uvalde with his wife, Melissa, and writes news stories, commentary, and editorials for which he has won numerous awards from the Texas and South Texas Press Associations. We're thrilled to have Craig here today with us, and Craig has been trying to navigate the waters in Uvalde, which have been very difficult to navigate after the tragedy last year. So he will be talking about some of the various roadblocks that he's come up against in that small community trying to uncover the truth. And then at the end of the panel, end of the table, we have Kimberly Mata Rubio. Kimberly is the mother of Lexi Rubio, one of the 21 victims who died in the mass shooting on May 24th at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public History from St. Mary's University in San Antonio. She's president of Lives Robbed, a nonprofit organization formed to combat gun violence epidemic in America. She is an award-winning journalist, having earned multiple first and second place awards from the Regional South Texas Press Association and Statewide Texas Press Association, and she's bravely here to tell her story today. We're so thankful to have this wonderful panel. I'm going to start by just giving y'all a little bit of an update with regard to two of the issues that we'll be talking about here from a legislative standpoint and from a litigation standpoint, because sometimes we find that we have to pursue litigation just to be able to get what should be the public's records. So I'll start with legislation, and this is definitely an ultimate success story, but it's talking about the fact that, and we referred to it at lunch, the fact that HB 30 was passed this legislative session. This is a bill that has been championed and carried by Joe Moody 4 times. I'm sorry that Chairman Moody couldn't be with us here today, but he has tirelessly championed this bill. He has gone through so many negotiations with every law enforcement organization in the state of Texas, and we owe an eternal debt of gratitude to him. But what this bill does is it closes off that in-custody death loophole. And for those of you who don't know what this is, it is a part of the Texas Public Information Act that allowed for law enforcement at their discretion to keep the general public from having access to information involving an arrest that did not result in deferred adjudication or a conviction. So if there was a law enforcement incident that resulted in the death of the individual in law enforcement custody, that's obviously not going to result in a conviction or a deferred adjudication because the individual is deceased. And using that law that was originally intended to protect people who were innocent from being, adversely looked upon when they in fact weren't convicted, what has happened instead is in innumerable cases, law enforcement has closed off access to information about the last minutes of the lives of people that have been in their custody. This year, with HB 30 passing, it allows for that information to become public if the individual died in custody or if an individual who was not convicted and it didn't result in deferred adjudication consents to the disclosure. So this is a huge victory. It was 8 years in the making, and Kathy and Robert can talk about it more, but that's the legislative update. And then the litigation update involves the Uvalde tragedy. And I'm sorry, I get choked up every time I talk about this. I have twins that are exactly the same age as the children that were killed in this horrible mass shooting, and so I get choked up every time I talk about it. But in the Uvalde case, we have had to sue, and the reason we've had to sue is because the news media, countless news media, dozens of news media, have tried to get the information about what happened that day from law enforcement. They've tried to get it from the city of Uvalde. They've tried to get it from the county. They've tried to get it from the sheriff's office, the ISD, and the Department of Public Safety. And in this instance, the Department of Public Safety, keep in mind, there were over 300 law enforcement officials there that day. The largest contingent of that was from DPS, and DPS is doing the investigation into the law enforcement response. So it's a bit of the fox guarding the hen house. But DPS has done its investigation, they've completed their investigation, and the investigative records have still not become open to the public. This is something that is an ongoing problem. It is something that 14 different news organizations came together, everyone from the Texas Tribune to the New York Times and in between, came together to fight in the court system. And the lawsuit that is pending here in Travis County, the judge has recently entered a summary judgment saying the law enforcement exemption does not apply. Those records need to become available to the public. And the Uvalde district attorney who tried to intervene in the case was told that she cannot intervene in the case, and that case is moving forward. Unfortunately, despite the fact that the director of DPS has previously said once the investigation is complete, all of that information will be made public, they have already indicated they will be appealing the ruling. So while they are appealing the ruling, the information is still not made available to the public. We're now going on 16 months since this tragedy happened. So those are the two updates from a litigation and a legislative standpoint, but let's hear from our panelists who have much more personal stories to tell. Robert, let's start with you. Can you tell us about your son Graham and his encounter with the Mesquite Police Department on that fateful night 10 years ago?
Our son was 18 years old, a week shy of his 19th birthday, and he was in Mesquite, and he and some friends of his took some LSD, and we're walking around, and Graham, his reaction to it or whatever, he was kind of running around, and they're trying to corral him up and get him back to the house to a place of safety or whatever. And they went by a junior high and caused a little commotion of some sort. One of the custodians there at the junior high called the Mesquite Police Department, and they rolled up on the scene, and there were 5 police officers and an EMT, 2 EMT people there. And they handcuffed Graham and he was kind of just acting kind of wild. But Graham's was 110 pounds, wearing a pair of shorts and shoes and a t-shirt. You know, there wasn't much to him. But they had 5 policemen there, and they tasered him and handcuffed him, and somewhere in that melee, I think he bit a police officer, and I don't know, they got him in the car and were taking him to the police station, and he was thrashing around. Excuse me. In the car. And it's like maybe a half a mile from the junior high to the police station. But during the trip to the police station, they pulled over, and he had been just thrashing around in the car, and they tasered him several times. Like they said, to calm him down, and got him to the police station, and put him in a restraint chair and set him in a room. And this is about 11 o'clock. About 1 o'clock, there was, he was unresponsive. And they took him to the hospital. Kathy and I got that dreaded phone call that no parent wants to hear, but we got a call from the police department, I think, and they said that our son was in the hospital in Dallas, severely injured, and that we need to get there. And this is 3 in the morning. We live 100 miles from Dallas. Took us 2 hours to get there. We got there about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were informed that he was gravely injured and that he was still under arrest for felony assault on a police officer. So we were not allowed to even go in the ICU room where he was. They had a police officer in the ICU and one at the door going in, and then several police officers at the elevator. One thing that I noticed that I'd never seen before was there's one policeman kind of walking back and forth between all of them. He had on a jacket that said cleat across the back. I'd never heard of what that is. But anyhow, he was guarded until there was no further brain activity. And then they all packed up and left. Before they left, one of the detectives met with us in a little chaplain's office and told us about what a bad character Graham was, because they'd looked at his Facebook page and whatnot, and told us that we could come down to the police station. They had some video, that they would explain what all happened to him, and that we could come down and they would tell us what all happened. So we went home, and after the funeral, I thought, well, if he was, because they said the EMT had checked him out and said that he was in a condition that he could be taken to jail instead of to the hospital. And in the back of my head, I thought, well, I'd sure like to see a mug shot of him standing up there in a condition to be put in jail. And we contacted a lawyer there in Paris, and so I thought it would be better if, instead of just us going to the police station and having them tell us what they wanted us to hear or whatever, that perhaps if we had a lawyer, maybe it might have somebody else to look at the videos or whatever. And the lawyer requested for us to go down there, and that's when we found out that they would not release any information whatsoever, and they cited that loophole. And in the back of my mind, it's like, if somebody dies in police custody, you would think they would fling open the doors. Why did this happen? What can we do to prevent this from happening? And that was not the case. And
So let's, Kathy, do you mind picking up and talking about what roadblocks did you experience and how did you ultimately find out? Because the description that Robert just gave sort of explained the events of that evening, but when you walked into that hospital, you didn't know any of that. And you were kept from seeing your son in the last minutes of his life. So what were the roadblocks you ran into, and how did you ultimately get the information that you know today?
Well, you're right. The roadblock started immediately. I took the phone call that came at 3 a.m. and said our son it was from a police officer. He said our son had been injured. It was serious, and could we come he was at Baylor Hospital, and could we come? And I asked if he'd been in a car accident, and the officer said no. And so I said, well, what happened? Well, he's severely injured, and you need to come right away. And that's all the information I got then, and of course we did go right away. And as Robert said, when we got to the hospital, met by hospital staff initially, and they carried us to the ICU, led us to the ICU. And then immediately we ran into these officers that were between us and our son. And I could see through the open door into his ICU area, cracked door. He was unconscious. He was on a ventilator. He had, he wasn't talking to anyone. And yet they said, well, he's under arrest. He's in serious trouble. He's a bad guy. He's facing felony charges. He's in big trouble, and because he's under arrest, we can't allow you in to see him. And as far as what information they gave us at that time about what happened, I don't honestly remember anything, because I just told the officer right then, I said, none of that matters right now. So we got, bare minimum. I guess perhaps they did tell us he hit his head. I remember the ICU doctor who was treating him told us that the police said that he hit his head in the squad car. She didn't sound like she believed what they said at all. And so right away there was some mistrust and doubt about what kind of truth we were getting from them interjected into the whole scene. There was an intake that said he had been a victim of physical assault on the intake form at the hospital. So it just didn't seem like what information we were getting from the police. It certainly wasn't complete and may not even be true. So, like Robert said, we went to an attorney. well, I got contacted by a detective 3 days later, 3 days after Graham's death. I had a voicemail from the Mesquite Police Department detective saying that when we took care of all those things that we surely had to do, we could come to them and ask any questions we wanted, and they'd try and answer our questions. It was just evident that they had the upper hand. They had the information, they were in control, and we weren't. And so we went to an attorney because we didn't want to, at that point, I didn't want to see a police officer, much less go to the police department and into their office and sit down and have any kind of conversation. So our attorney was just a local attorney that, we knew. It's a small town, sort of knew of. And he said he would try and get records, but, he wasn't very hopeful. And certainly he did not have any luck getting any sort of records. About 2 months later, after we spoke to him, which we spoke to him almost right away. I was amazed when I look back, like we were functioning that way, but you just go on, And so about 2 months later, he said, no, he couldn't get any records. So we went, he said, you can file a lawsuit. Some people file a lawsuit, and by filing a lawsuit, sometimes a judge will order records to be released. We had we didn't want to file a lawsuit. We just, like every parent who loses a child, every parent wants to know what happened. That's what we want, what happened to my child. And it's just, I've talked to many, and that's all we want. We want to know what happened. So we had very little information, and he said, well, you can file a lawsuit. So he referred us to a wrongful death attorney in Fort Worth. And sometime later, I met with that attorney, and she said she was very patient and explained that certain Texas laws, because of the way the Texas laws were written, that the police just simply didn't have to release information to us, and so they wouldn't. And we could file a lawsuit, but if you file a lawsuit and it's not specific about what happens, what has happened, specifically who did what, that lawsuit will be dismissed.
And that's what y'all did, and that's what happened, right?
It's what we did. Well, she initially wasn't interested in filing a lawsuit because we didn't have the information to file. She said you don't know the details because the city won't release the records. They don't have to release the records, and because you don't have the details, if you file a lawsuit, it will be dismissed because it's not specific. She said it's a classic catch-22 situation.
So y'all are amazingly enterprising people. You still got answers. You didn't get it from the police. You didn't get it through your lawsuit. How did you ultimately get answers?
I guess we were lucky in a way. Yeah. The same attorney in the same initial meeting, she told me that, I said, well, what can we do? What can we do? It's just incredible to me, the situation that we found ourselves in. And she said, well, the FBI could investigate. We could ask them to investigate because it seemed that there might be a civil rights violation, a use of excessive force, which is a violation of the civil rights of an individual. She said the DPS could also investigate and might investigate, but honestly, I felt like that would be totally pointless to ask the DPS to help us in that situation at that time. So I decided to go the FBI route. I sat down and I wrote down what I knew, and I'll back up and say most of what we knew came to us because Graham's friend who was with him was brave enough to come to us and say, this is what happened, this is what we did. We did take the LSD. We were out walking around and Graham had this bad reaction. And we tried to, we, this group of friends, we were trying to keep him safe. He was running and saying, I gotta get out of here. And we would run and we'd tackle him some to keep him, out of the street or out of, some dangerous situation. And he might have been scratched. He might have scraped his knees. He was wearing shorts. He might have scraped his elbows. But he wasn't hurt. He wasn't he wasn't really physically harmed when the police came. But when the police came, we scattered. We all left him. We ran away. And then I heard him scream. So I stopped and I went back. And so we knew that much. We knew that yes, he had taken the drugs. No, he hadn't been beating his head against everything in sight, like they said. They gave actually several different stories that were printed in different articles, said different things. He beat his head on the ground, or he ran into this door, or, then it was the squad car. So the story was changing, but this friend said, when I left, when I ran away, he wasn't hurt. When I came back, he was on the ground with officers around him, and then they prevented him from getting close to that scene or seeing anything further. So with what we knew, I wrote the FBI and I asked them to investigate to determine whether his civil rights had been violated. And they did. And they, in a few months, I think, time, they wrote back and said they had thoroughly investigated and found that his civil rights were not violated. And then it just occurred that we should ask the FBI for the records that they had. If they investigated, they had gotten the records that we had been unable to get. And so we filed a federal information request. And after some time, some fees, a good deal of time because they redacted the videos. Well, they did send us all the videos, redacted video, and some other documents. We turned those over to the attorney in Fort Worth, and she refiled our case, which she had eventually filed, just because she said, things just don't seem right in this case, and I'm going to go ahead and file. If you have records coming, which I said, they're sending us records. They say they're sending records. So she filed and then amended the filing based on the records that we got. And it did go forward all the way to trial.
Yeah.
And what was the outcome of that?
The jury found for the officers that they, I guess, were just too dumb to know that he needed medical help. I don't know.
So this incredible story was told in a very lengthy article, a series that was done by the Austin American-Statesman in 2017. And if y'all ever wonder if what you're doing is worth it, the answer is it's worth it.
It is.
In 2017, I read that article and knew about this problem in the law and knew about Joe Moody's bill that was pending before the legislature at that time. And so Kelly and I reached out. Well, I reached out to the attorney who I happen to know. Kelly and I reached out to the Dyers together once we got permission from their attorney. And since that time, the Dyers have come and told this story, their family's story, time and time again to the legislature. What has given you the strength to come back now 4 sessions to tell this story?
Well, Graham is gone. We'll never have him back. Didn't get to go to college graduation or a marriage or anything like that. And faith tells me that some good will come out of evil. And we felt like if we can change this law, when we heard about Representative Moody's law, oh boy, it gave us like a sense of purpose, if nothing else. That, if we can't do anything else, if we can help to prevent another family from going through what we did, the unknowing, to make police, government, but police specifically, more accountable. We give the police the power, literally, of life and death over people, and they're humans just like we are. We all make mistakes, and if they make mistakes, well, learn from your mistakes. That's like any trade or profession. I'm a musician. You practice, and if you blow something, well, you learn what to do to correct it. In anything, any endeavor that you do in life, you want to learn from your mistakes so that you don't make them again. And that with the police, with this kind of power that they have, it's incumbent that what they do is open records. They work for us. They are instruments of our creation. And so it's, if you read the preamble to the freedom of information, it says right there, it is not for them to decide what is good for us to know. And so the fact that Representative Moody has been working tirelessly, the press has worked tirelessly to bring this out, and so we have no other choice but to hop right in on the truck, and we'll continue to do this.
We appreciate y'all hopping on that truck because I know it's hard. Craig, the Dyer's experience and the role that the press played in being able to give them a sense of purpose and being able to have them really effectuate change for Texans moving forward. Your paper in Uvalde has been at the center of everything that's been going on since May of 2022. Can you talk to us about what your newspaper has been doing to try to help give some reason to what happened and what roadblocks y'all have run up against?
Sure. We, first off, the 19 children and 2 teachers who were killed on May 24 were not injured in police custody, but they were surrounded by 376 officers. 91 of them were DPS, 150 were U.S. Border Patrol, 28 were Uvalde police officers, and 15 were from the Uvalde County Sheriff's Department. Those kids were in that classroom for 77 minutes surrounded by that kind of police force that was unable or unwilling to intervene. We had a long-standing relationship with all local law enforcement and our local institutions. I've been there 40 years. We're on a first-name basis with these people. We interacted with them daily, very effectively. Kimberly was with us. She was our crime reporter for many years. She could tell you, she could call up any one of them and they would give her their story. At the end of that day, all the walls went up and we began a nonstop journey to try to dig into what happened behind those doors There have been a dozen Freedom of Information Act requests filed. We have been successful in getting maybe half a dozen of those, but some of them are incomplete. We've been lied to. We've been told that the information was turned over. And once that happens, once an entity, in this case it's the school district, tells us they've supplied the information we requested, we have no recourse. There are no teeth in the AG's office at that point. They've taken a look at the evidence, they said it's public record, turn it over. School district says we turned it over. Now we have no tools left other than to go to court. So we keep hitting that particular roadblock. The DA, our local DA, is now in possession of the 3,000-page DPS report. She says we can't have that because there's a criminal investigation going on. She's looking at a criminal case against one of those hundreds of law enforcement officers, potentially. We know the odds of that are almost zero. She told us the summer before, 2 months after the attack, that she would have her deal wrapped up by November of that year. January of last year, she said it'd be this summer. This summer, she said it'll be Christmas. So time keeps slipping by as these families wait to learn what happened to their children. As the Dyers said, as Kimberly and her, the families of the other victims say that's all they want. They want to know why, how, when their children didn't make it out of those classrooms. We're not going to let go of it. We don't have as many friends as we once had in some of the institutions. We keep it fresh in the newspaper. 2 weeks ago, we wrote an editorial saying it'd been 16 months and we still don't have answers from any one of the entities, not the police department. They're yet to conduct an investigation. They claim theirs is held up because the DA won't give them their evidence, her evidence, and that's a personality fight. The school district won't give us the amount of money that was paid to the administrators who were running that school that day, who either resigned or were fired. There were 7 of them involved. One of them was Pete Arredondo, who was the incident commander. They won't tell us how much they paid those administrators to get them out the door. The AG said that they had to turn it over. That's the case. They refuse. We have requested the records of the school shooter. He's dead. He was 18 years old. He doesn't qualify protection under the FERPA law. And they tell us that the DPS says they can't give it to us. He was a school dropout when he was a senior, and he qualified to be in the 9th grade. Something's wrong there. The district didn't do their job. The county sheriff's department, the county ordered an investigation of the sheriff's procedural policies, not what they did or didn't do on May 24. That's as deep as that investigation has gone. We're keeping it alive in our paper. This is today's Leader News. That picture on the front page is the Vice President of the United States with Kimberly and 2 other women who lost children that day, daughters. They're in Washington, D.C. during the designation of the new office to prevent school violence or crime prevention. So every chance we get, we're going to keep pressing for the answers that the community and these families of victims deserve.
Do you worry, Craig, that the DPS investigation may never come out?
Yes, I do. I mean, the HB 30 was a wonderful stroke of positive news, but it doesn't guarantee that we will get that investigation. It's a very real possibility.
And Kimberly, we know the last year and 4 months have been horrific for you. Can you tell the audience about that day, where you were when you got word of the shooting, and what information you were getting?
I was at the Valley Leader News that morning. I was sitting at my desk writing a story about a new business in town. It was right before lunch, so we were talking and joking. A little off task. My coworker, Melissa, went to turn in a story in our editor's office where the scanner is, and she was listening and relayed to us that there was a shooting. And at the time, I remember thinking, our poor crime reporter is going to have a busy week ahead of her. I don't remember at what point I realized that there was some sort of connection to the school, but I didn't have my vehicle with me that day, so I had to get a ride to the school. It was chaotic. It was people screaming, crying, trying to push back officers. I was late, so I didn't really know what was going on. Eventually, we're told that we can pick up our kids at the reunification center, which was located at the Civic Center in the middle of town. So I found another ride over there, and bus after bus arrived, and Lexi did not come off of one of those buses. We started hearing rumors about some of the kids being transferred to area hospitals, so we sent my dad to San Antonio, and I went to the local hospital and gave him a description. She wasn't there. We went to the funeral home. She wasn't there. I went back to the school just to sit. Eventually, I was told I won't get answers here. I need to go back to the reunification center. So I went back, and they are asking all of the families, the remaining families, to provide descriptions of the children, what they were wearing that day, and I did. I know the sun was setting. It was already getting dark when they came for me and my husband and asked us to come wait somewhere quieter with them. My husband got up immediately. But I remember looking at the woman sitting next to me and telling her, I don't want to go. Because I knew. Sure enough, they went across the street to the county attorney's office. And they told me that Lexi wasn't going to come home. It's a blur after that. I don't think we realized that there was issues with the response until a few days later, when we realized that all of the reporters were asking us the same questions about the response. And I remember at the time I told one of the reporters, I can't think about somebody else's failure. I'm the one that left my child at school. I'm the one that left my child at school.
Since that time, after you've worked through as much as you can of the initial shock, what have you been able to do to try to learn the truth of what happened that day?
Without the media's help, I'm just another parent in a small town. So definitely leaning into that. I know a lot of people in the beginning thought, well, you don't trust the media. Well, it's different when you work where I work. I knew I needed the media just as much as they needed me to get her story out there, to get a platform so people were paying attention. Stay up to date with city council meetings and school board meetings, regular meetings with the DA, fighting for accountability and transparency and not quitting.
Tell us about the organization that you started in honor of Lexi.
Yeah. I am president of Lives Robbed. It is a group we formed with a few other mothers, and we are fighting at the federal level for a complete ban on assault weapons. But also we've taken this fight to the state level to try to raise the age from 18 to 21. As everyone remembers, that failed.
You mentioned, and you are in a unique role. You're in a unique role where you know the importance of the media, but you also know that people have tried to create distrust with the media. I think everyone in this room knows that in many ways the media is fighting for exactly what you're fighting for, and they're the conduit for those who don't have the resources, the power, the connections to fight those fights. And that's certainly what we're doing in the lawsuit against DPS, is trying to uncover the truth for the families and for the rest of the Texas citizens out there that want to know the truth. But why do you think it's so important for the general public, in addition to yourself, to know what happened that day?
I think once you're a journalist, you never stop seeing the world through that lens. In every space I occupy, I am first and foremost Lexi's mom, but I'm also a journalist, and I have questions, and I want answers. I want to share those answers with the world, because people need to know what happened, need to their point, so it doesn't happen again. There's a lot to review here. It's keeping in mind that we need to stay up to date and holding our local officials accountable. Schools need to make school security a priority. Police need to have some sort of policy in place to ensure that they're prepared for situations like this. There is a lot to learn from Uvalde, so no one has to go through what we've gone through.
And certainly, and sadly, this may not be the last school shooting, but without having the information about what happened that day, what's to prevent the next one from having 500 police officers there doing nothing for 3 hours? Mm-hmm. What happened that day and the errors that were committed, no one can learn from without knowing what happened. Mm-hmm. And so I guess this is a question for any of the panelists. What does this lack of information do? What does it do for you personally, and what does it do for society as a whole? Anyone?
Well, the lack of information, I think the motto of the Washington Post is, democracy dies in darkness. And that's exactly. You know, we have the greatest experiment going on the face of the earth with our government and our system. And countless countries look up to the United States. But it's a pretty fragile little mechanism, and we constantly have to keep on top of things. Without the press asking these tough questions, you know, these entities can do what they want. And there are countries where if the government wants to do something, they do it, and they don't give a flip what anybody says. You know, it's the journalists that the freedom of the press ensures our freedom. You know, everybody goes, oh, it's the military that guarantees our freedom and all these kinds of things. Well, really, that's not the case, guys. It's the freedom of the press. The fact that we ask these tough questions and learn and constantly make new laws, change laws.
And y'all never gave up, and that's why that law has changed. And Kimberly, I hope you never give up on the changes in the law that you're looking at making with assault rifles. what other laws do y'all, as a panel, believe, how can we better the Public Information Act in the future? What other changes can we seek that you think we should be striving for next session and sessions to come? Are there any particular suggestions you have?
Yeah, I mentioned the information requests we'd filed and the rule that they were public, and then saying there weren't any teeth in it. And we talked about this, that somehow to make it more rigorous. Give us a little more firepower when the AG says, this is public record. How do you follow up with the entity that says we turned it over? To me, that would be hugely beneficial.
Enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, community newspapers, try to pay the press bill. There's not much money left for attorney's fees.
Understood.
But I'll say this, that the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas has been a wonderful partner to us in Haynes and Boone through this whole ordeal. They've offered professional advice, hand-holding, and just that feeling that we're not alone. So as a journalist, having somebody walking next to you, or at least not far behind you, is a very reassuring feeling.
Thank you. Kimberly, do you have any thoughts on that? No? Okay, we've got about 5 minutes, and I could go on with questions, but I have a feeling there are a few people in the audience that want to ask some. So why don't we open it up to just a few minutes of questions for this really wonderful and brave panel. Does anybody have any questions? So Bill Alishire, wonderful open government advocate and attorney, has asked the question why a lot of the information has not already been turned over to the legislature involving the Uvalde shooting, because they do have special rules for special access. And I can take this one. It actually has been. What they are requiring is non-disclosure agreements. The DPS has required non-disclosure agreements to be signed by any lawmaker. In fact, Senator Gutierrez originally refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement and did not want to, didn't want to be subject to an NDA, and he filed a lawsuit against DPS, and the district attorney intervened in that lawsuit, and ultimately the lawsuit did not proceed. He wasn't successful in the lawsuit because of some procedural issues, but he did sign an NDA, and he has seen all of the footage, and a terabyte of data was delivered from DPS to the House Investigating Committee, which had former Texas Supreme Court Justice Eva Guzman on it, Chairman Burris, and Chairman Moody. Those are the 3 members of the House Investigating Committee, and so they were given a terabyte of data from DPS, and then the Senate also convened an investigating committee. I think y'all heard Senator Kolkhorst mention the fact that she was the vice chair of that committee. Senator Nichols was the chairman. They also got some information. I don't know how much information they got. So there are lawmakers that have seen some of the information that came out, but they're all subject to non-disclosure agreements. From the DA's office as well? My understanding is that it's come from DPS, and the way that the investigation has gone, DPS and the Texas Rangers have done the investigation, and they have supplied that investigation to the DA's office. But that investigation was completed in February, and Colonel McCraw testified to that in a Senate committee hearing.
I'll add something to that. We have seen much video from the hallway at Robb and also from various body cameras. That was all leaked. And the people who had the information, the DPS had the investigation, the lawmakers who signed non-disclosure agreements had the information, and the FBI. So whoever leaked that information came from one of those 3 sources.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna close out this panel with a statement that I thought was really poignant that Chairman Hunter said this morning. He said, "Bringing integrity to the process means transparency." And that really resonated with me, and I think that it's something that resonates with all of the members of this panel. Please thank them very much for their bravery in talking about some really difficult topics today. Thank you.